Hello, good evening. Good evening. My name is Susan Oxtoby, and I'd like to welcome you to the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive to our Mosse lecture with Pinar Öğrenci. And I'm delivering these opening remarks on behalf of Professor Denise Göktürk, who's with us this evening, but she's lost her voice, and I feel just terribly for Denise. But thank you for being with us, and her mask says no voice. Denise is a professor in the Department of German at UC Berkeley, and she's also affiliated in the Department of Film and Media. And it's with great pleasure that we welcome our special guest, and the artist and filmmaker Pinar Öğrenci, who has traveled to Berkeley from Berlin via New York City and New York State, where she was in this past week giving lectures and screenings at Columbia University, Cornell University, Bard College, and the Goethe Institute in New York City. So welcome, Pinar. Pinar Öğrenci brings an important perspective to challenges of state violence, oppression, archives of migration, and possibilities of aesthetic intervention. It's a pleasure for us to host her with a Mosse lecture in which she'll shed light on her artistic practice, which involves both single-channel films, as you'll see tonight, and installation work for gallery spaces. Immediately following her lecture, we will screen her very impressive film, Acid, The Avalanche, which was released in 2022. It's 60 minutes in length. And then following that, Professor Minoo Moallem will join Pinar on stage for a conversation, and then, of course, that will be opened up to the audience for comments and questions. So on behalf of the German Department and the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, I'd like to thank the Mosse Foundation for their continued generous support of this series of public humanities events organized by the Department of German. A number of the Mosse Lectures have been held in partnership with BAMPFA, which is wonderful for us, and timed with residencies with prominent filmmakers and visual artists. In fact, earlier this semester, we hosted a Mosse Lecture with the Berlin-based Ukrainian filmmaker Sergei Loznitsa. He was here for a residency of his films and gave a Mosse Lecture. Tonight's screening is also part of our ongoing series, Documentary Voices, here at BAMPFA, which is presented in conjunction with Denise Göktürk's UC Berkeley class, Documentary Forms. And we extend a very, very warm welcome to Denise Göktürk's students who are with us this evening. And tonight's special event, we've partnered with the UC Berkeley Conference on Media and Migration in a Digital Age. And this conference is currently taking place. It's organized by Minoo Moallem in collaboration with Amir Aziz, Osa Oxtoby, and Alison Unziger. The conference started this morning. It continued here in the afternoon. Tomorrow, the events in the conference will be at 30 Stevens Hall here on campus. So as mentioned, Professor Moallem will lead the on-stage conversation, and just a word about her background. She served as chair of the Department of Women and Gender Studies and subsequently director of media studies here at UC Berkeley in recent years. She's the author of books such as Between Warrior Brother and Veiled Sister, Islamic Fundamentalism and the Politics of Patriarchy in Iran, published in 2005, and The Persian Carpet, The Nation as a Transnational Commodity, 2018. So her experience as on feminist approaches to nationalism, migration, and the diaspora in and beyond the Middle East, as well as the cultural politics of media, commodities, and material culture and circulation, makes her the perfect fit for our interlocutor for tonight's conversation. Our guest, Pinar Öğrenci, was born in the city of Van. She grew up speaking Turkish and came to Istanbul to study architecture, where she completed an MA in restoration. Her training in architecture continues to inform her work as an artist. A focus on space, environment, and atmosphere is prominent in her moving image works and site-specific installations. Öğrenci engages the place, site, and architecture as the materialization of violence. By delving into local archives, she initiates a process of collaborative memory, engaging communities in questions that have been remembered, erased, or overlooked. Her works invite us to witness the rich, multifaceted layers of survival, resistance, and resilience. She has also worked as a curator in an art space that she founded, Mars Istanbul, and that was between 2010 and 2018, at which point she relocated from Istanbul to Berlin, Germany, for political reasons. So her works have been presented internationally at art museums, and she's participated in various biennials, such as the biennial in Venice, and she's taught as a guest lecturer at various institutions in Berlin and Venice. Öğrenci received the prestigious Villa Romana Prize in 2023. And just a few words about the film that we'll be showing on this program. And again, I want to thank Denise Göktürk, who I'm sharing with you Denise Göktürk's prepared remarks. So Denise says of Acid, the Avalanche, this was a work commissioned and first shown by Documenta 15 at Kassel in 2022. The Avalanche begins as a personal journey to the artist's father's hometown, Müküs, formerly the Armenian Mokes, now predominantly a Kurdish community. Her essay film develops into a poetic meditation on gaps and erasures in public memory, as well as environmental transformation. Throughout her essay film, she wrestles with the limits of knowledge and knowability. Again, thank you, Denise. And now help me in a very, very warm welcome for Pinar Öğrenci.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Susan Oxtoby, for this beautiful introduction. And thank you so much to Denise Göktürk for noticing my work and inviting me to Berkeley, BAMPFA, which also actually opened possibilities of Columbia in New York, Columbia University, Berkeley, and Bard College. I'm a bit excited, but yeah, thank you so much for coming. It all started with a song. The streets of Istanbul in 2015, as young boys, girls, and families who had just fled the war in Syria, mingled with the crowds on Istiklal Street, walking with hope for a new future, a group of Arab and Iranian refugees playing Nassan Elena El Havva, Fairuz's famous song, A Gentle Breeze Passed Over Us. Take me home, asking the breeze to carry them back home. Later, they played Mavtini, My Homeland, a poem written by Palestinian poet Ibrahim Tukan in the early 1930s, composed by Lebanese musician Mohammed Fulaifal as a national anthem for Palestine in 1934. Once an anthem of struggle for homeland, it later became a symbol of sadness and separation. It all started with my curiosity about the secret of this song that moved refugees on the street to tears. Later, I noticed that Mavtini's melody had inspired the unforgettable 1st May Workers' Day anthem in Turkish, a symbol of resistance and struggle in Turkey. A Gentle Breeze Passed Over Us video work is inspired by the story of an Iraqi musician whom I met in Vienna in 2016. He lost his instrument oud when he was passing from Turkey to Greek island and had to leave his oud to the waters of Mediterranean. I tried to depict the remains of an ancient culture and the search for a safe place to call home. Istanbul street lights, advertisement aesthetics, and technology drastically changed around 2015 after the war in Syria. The Arabic alphabet, which was used by Ottomans and banned by Turkish Republic just after the First World War and removed from the facades of the buildings and also public spaces, now they were back in Istanbul, the old capital of Ottoman Empire, almost 100 years later, by another war in the region with digital technology. Back in 2015, I invited 6 Syrian artists to dinner at my studio in Istanbul and created a fanzine based on our conversations. I imagined Istanbul could be a meeting point for Arab artists and intellectuals at that time. I was unaware that only 5 months later, our meeting, the sky would turn red for many of us, and myself and many other dissidents would have to immigrate. My first institutional exhibition, called A Gentle Breeze Passed Over Us, at Kunsthaus Vienna in 2016, and traveled to Depot Istanbul at the same year with a new title called Under the Red Sky at Depot Istanbul. It was all focused on displacement of Syrian refugees. Political activist and founder of Depot Art Institution, Osman Kavala, was present the same year of the exhibition. Let's turn back to end of 2015, when my own story drastically changed in Turkey. I traveled from Istanbul to Diyarbakır for a peace march opposing the Turkish government's militarized crackdown on alleged insurgents in the Kurdish majority city Ahmet. At the demonstration riot, police dispersed the crowd using tear gas and a water cannon, prompting me and other protesters to take shelter in a nearby mall. It was the last day of 2015. Kurdish shop owners started to give sugar cubes and candies to the people. Later, we understood that sugar reduces the effects of tear gas. People would carry candies in their pockets because police attacks were usual in Kurdistan of Turkey. Kurdish women, mothers, wives, sisters were often pictured with large white handkerchiefs attached to a stick as a call for peace resolution. I created white surface stitching handmade paper tissues produced by 4 Kurdish women who forcibly left their villages in my hometown in the 1990s from nearby cities. Several video works projected on these white curtains as a metaphor of peace, but also collective mourning of Kurdish women. We were hunted by police who used pepper gas and locked the doors. I was caught with 23 protesters and detained in the Diyarbakır Police Center. We spent New Year's Eve and the first 5 days of the New Year in custody. They checked my texts, social media accounts, travels, telephone messages while under custody. I was to be tried with a heavy prison sentence of 18 years for being a supporter of a terrorist organization and trying to kill 5 police officers who were allegedly injured during the protest. When my 2-year trial was concluded on 13 February 2018, I got 1 year and 6 months sentence that was postponed for 5 years. It was a probation. Within 3 months, I left Turkey and immigrated to Berlin in June 2018. During my trial between 2016 and 2018, I tried to leave Turkey for each case. I stayed in Vienna, where I met with Iraqi musician Ahmet Shakaki. Then I was in Stockholm, Oslo, and Brussels. After traveling in cold European cities, finally I spent 3 months in Greece in the summer of 2016. When local master Dina Skutri, whom I met on Syros Island in Greece, told me that her family came from Istanbul and Izmir, our eyes filled with tears. It was as if we had known each other for many years. I was trying to find a new place to immigrate at that time, and it was almost impossible to imagine myself outside of Istanbul. She said Syros was built by refugees from Anatolia. Most of them had wine mills, bakeries, and patisseries in Izmir, Ayvalık, and other cities, and had to leave everything behind during the First World War and Greek-Turkish War. Thousands of Greeks living on the western and northern coasts of Anatolia displaced by Turkish-Greek War. And sweet and solidarity had another form here. I made Turkish Delight film that we are going to watch on Friday, all about how Greek refugees survived by lokum, or Turkish Delight, migration and sweet bitterness of the national symbol of Turkish culinary culture, which was also a symbol of bitterness of our country in my mind. I like to show another work about struggle of women from Anatolia. Women protested against the thermal plant project and the hydroelectric power plant in Gerze and Aslandere in Black Sea region of Turkey. They stood up against the police and used their everyday tools, wooden stick, to create noise and make their voices heard. Through peaceful means, they successfully stopped the private energy project supported by the state. The projects were threatening the ecological balance for humans and non-humans in their regions. They protected their rivers, waters, and ecology. I collected 40 sticks from demonstrators and imagined this strong Anatolian woman as a big water wave. These are some images from the installation. I grew up in the 1980s under the regime of Turkish military coup. We were listening and singing band albums, reading band books, and reciting poems. We are the children of the 80s broken revolutionaries. We were all dispersed, imprisoned, tortured, or exiled by Turkish right-wing regimes or military coups, but never stopped dreaming of revolution and change. All my films are attempts to claim back what was taken from us and to complete the missing part of my own stories, my story in Van, Istanbul, and Berlin. Cinemas are all closed for a long time in the 80s in my hometown. They most probably thought that cinema was dangerous. I had chance to see film at Cinema Salon for the first time when I came to Istanbul to study architecture. Film was called Camdan Kalp, Glass Heart by Fehmi Yaşar, which was selected as the best film of Istanbul Film Festival in 1990. It was the first and only film by Fehmi Yaşar, but made me to dream becoming a filmmaker for many years. The 1980s, my most beautiful youth period, unconsciously appeared in different works. My first documentary film, Gurbet is a Home Now, that I produced in collaboration with two female architects, Esra Akcan and Heide Moldenhauer. Film traces the discriminatory urban policies in Berlin in the 1980s, focused on Kreuzberg and the guest worker families from Turkey. We will be watching the film on Friday. These are some images from the installation. Then I made a remake of Inventur, which originally shot in Munich in 1975 by legendary Black Wave Yugoslav filmmaker Jilimir Jilnik, and I made this film, the remake, in Chemnitz city in Germany. Film based on the anti-racist struggles of people living in this city, which is an old, former East German city. Unlike the original inventory, in which guest worker immigrants from European South descend the stairs of their building, in my remake, migrants, mostly Middle Eastern and Asian, work up the stairs. I imagine Germany as not a temporary but a permanent home for immigrants. These are some images from Venice Biennial Disobedience Archive. And I produced my second documentary film, Glück auf in Deutschland, in 2024. This time I look at the Ruhr region, the metal and mining industry, racism in labor, health, and insurance systems in Germany. I look between post-war period till the end of 1980s, which was the time of closing mines in the Ruhr region. I collaborated with Petra Dolata working on energy and women, asking her unrepresented and unpaid labor of women in the Ruhr region and wife of miners. Stefan Moitra from Bergbau Museum Bochum about lack of stories of miners in the museums and archives. While going through the Ruhr Museum's photography archive, I didn't come across any images of guest worker miners between 1952 and 1982. Guest worker miners worked in German mines for at least 27 years after Second World War. Why weren't they represented in any media by the mining industry? I also collaborated with Daniel Trobowski, expert of silicosis and lung cancer on mines, about racism and health, racism on health and insurance systems in Germany. However, I was making the film, Germany was falling in terms of freedom of speech. We immigrants, especially from Muslim countries, were facing another racist wave. I made collage works for the first time in my life, cutting papers, bodies, factories, towers, and firewalls, imagining different joyful realities for workers, miners, and migrants and their families. Here are some images from the collages. Glück auf is a greeting used by miners in Germany when they leave to mine, wishing them to come back home safe. I made the Glück auf in Deutschland film wishing good luck to all migrants facing racist threats and attacks inspired by this song. The chief of the Ruhr choir of German miners refused my request to use the song for my exhibition, probably because I was a migrant artist. They didn't want a non-German artist to represent their prideful mining story. So I met with choirs in the Ruhr region and asked two Kurdish and Turkish women to whistle the song. Whistling was forbidden because it resembled the sound of methane gas, an explosive substance in a mine. And also according to an old proverb in the Ruhr region, women should not whistle, but we did all together. My last film called Kind Change, based on photography, video, and sound archive of first-generation guest worker Nuri Musluoğlu, living in Stuttgart. Film was commissioned by MKG Hamburg. Film starts with solidarity meetings and demonstrations in Stuttgart in the 80s against military coup and demanding freedom of prisoners, mostly Kurdish in Turkey. Film includes concert recordings of exiled musicians such as Sümeyra Çakır, Melike Demirağ, and Cem Karaca, and Şivan Perver. All left country due to the coup d'etat in 1980. Nuri Musluoğlu also recorded demonstrations against first racist attacks, nuclear stations, conditions of refugee camps, and peace movement in the 80s. I called the film Kind Change, inspired from the banners saying Kind Change, mentioned Holocaust. This time I called Kind Change. Sorry. I called the film Kind Change, inspired from the banner saying Kind Chance mentioned Holocaust. This time I called Kind Change, to remind that Germany has not learned enough from its own history and contributing to another genocide in Gaza and feeding racism inside and outside of the country. For my solo show at MKG Hamburg, I also produced a big collage wallpaper called Big Day. Film and collage work show the struggle of migrants and their contribution to German politics, which I believe that never enough understood and appreciated. I want to finish with my work that produced for documenta. We will be discussing later. Ashit. People believe that a black rooster lived in Putkin Monastery in Van that crowed on stormy days, warning avalanche or other disasters, and guided people who lost their way to the monastery. At the end of the Ashit film that I produced 3 years ago for Documenta 15, I used the sound of a rooster to emphasize impending disaster, without knowing that the disaster or a genocide in Gaza was so close. I see the practice of art as a part of the struggle for goodness and compassion, for an equal, just and fair world for, or home for all of us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pinar, for your wonderful presentation and this fantastic film. So, unfortunately, my dear colleague and friend, Professor Göktürk, who organized this event and has been in conversation with Pinar for a long time, lost her voice and could not be here. However, I'm going to kind of switch between my voice and her voice and ask you some questions. The first question is about the song. You start by saying it all started with a song, and the songs encourages us to listen to the landscape. Can you speak a little about the use of Harik Muradian's music in your film?
Sure. Yeah, Harik Muradian is from Van, my hometown. Yeah, I knew that he had to leave Van during just after the genocide, actually, in 1918. But I was not sure how can I use his voice, because he's not from Müküs or Mix, but from Çatak, the neighbor town. But then, thanks to my collaborator Asya Yağmuryan, she's an Armenian curator, and she found out that Harik Muradian made an album just before he died called Mokatsarer, which means the mountains of Moks, or Müküs. So all the album actually was a kind of collection of the songs that was sung just before the genocide, that Harik Muradian was collected from his relatives who were survived. But also, I would say that when I was making research or visiting Moks, my father's hometown, I was trying to find something secretly about my father, which was the film, as you saw, it's not about my father, but still I was trying to find something maybe meaningful. But then we found Harik Muradian, and Asya told me that Harik in Armenian means father. And then, she also said that Harik Muradian was the father of the folk music of Armenians, and who introduced the folk music from Anatolia. to the young generations of Armenians. And then, yeah, I said myself, you found your father, you know, instead of your own father, but Hayrik Muradian became the father of the film.
So great. Now I'm going with a question that I would like to pose. Many films on genocide provide witnessing or testimonies to pressure both those responsible for genocide and those who remain silent during the genocide. And your Avalanche seems to me it's by itself is a memorabilia. It's a film that is about memory. So, and most of these films are trying to prevent genocides, right? So I was wondering, given that we are living in a conjuncture where there is a live stream genocide happening, what do you want in Gaza? And what do you want the audience to leave after watching this Avalanche and witnessing another genocide, when we all said this is never again, never again, and it's happening again?
From the beginning of the film, actually, I just tried to not represent anything about genocide because it's impossible. I knew that it's impossible, so I never tried to represent also anything about MOX, you know, its economy or something else. I just wanted to make relations, you know, trying to concentrate to the relationality during the film. And of course, my country, you know, Turkish Republic, never accepted 1915 as genocide. And it was almost impossible to talk about it. And it's a crime, still a crime, talking about it or calling it as genocide. It's a crime in Turkey. So all this silence of the country after genocide and just trying to erase all the traces of Armenians who lived in Anatolia for long, long years, I believe that it was kind of second act of genocide, erasing the traces of people. So just I try to concentrate to the traces that shows that these people live there. You know, the language, you know, the names, the songs, the landscape, everything which makes connections, you know. The film actually based on the book of Judith Butler. In Turkish, it's called The Continuity of Nonviolence. How we can continue living in nonviolent situations. And she says that, you know, actually she makes quotation from Donna Haraway about remembering. You know, Haraway says that remember, the word of remember is related with being membership, member of communities. So the violence destroys the relationships, the bonds between communities, between societies, but also bonds between humans and non-humans, between us and nature. So yeah, I was thinking, how can I visualize this theory of non-violence to the film, to the language of the film, and I concentrated the landscape and the music and the language, whatever makes bonds. Yeah. So maybe I missed the end of the question. Huh?
You responded. Thank you. So let me go back to Denise, and she's asking that you, as in your presentation, you did an installation in a gallery, and how does the mode of reception differ from viewing on a screen of a theater? She's asking you what distinguishes the you know, the exhibition, the installation from the film screening.
Yeah, it's actually different experiment in the cinema and also in the exhibition space. I would say that actually the cinema, the audience of cinema is more, how to say, more solid than contemporary artwork. I have to say that because all the film screenings, all the festivals, or end of the film screenings during the festivals, we had big discussions and the questions came out. But contemporary world, art world, especially in Turkey, never responded. But of course, in documenta, during documenta, the space was big, and I hang this curtain, which made by 4 Kurdish women in my hometown, which also displaced from neighbor towns of Van. So this curtain created some sort of room and made a border between the museum entrance and the screen, and people were watching the film for, you know, from the beginning till the end. I think this situation of the curtain created some sort of intimacy or space or kind of room for people. Yeah, I always try to look to the space and how can I convert the space that people would feel comfortable watching the films.
Yes, I really admire how you use relationality to create a transnational connection between the Armenian genocide, the violence of the state towards Kurdish communities, as well as refugees that are coming from the other parts of the world and so on. It's just wonderful. I also think that you do a lot of great work with time and space. But it seems to me that you emphasize space in this film, and it seems to me time is a little bit stuck. Why prioritizing space? For example, mountains, roads, borders, and of course I understand that by creating a regional memory, you are kind of opposing the state memory and trying to say that, you know, memory of genocide cannot be contained only by the nation states, but there are various forms of remembering that keep it alive, right? So I wonder about time, the notion of time, why time gets stuck and the space becomes emphasized in your film.
Yeah. Since we were talking about the silence of the country since 1915, so it's almost like more than 100 years, you know, that this topic is still not discussed, not remembered, not enough talk in the country. So you feel like, you know, the time is very slow. Also in this part of the country, the roads are blocked by snow or avalanches, and it's impossible to reach there. Still we have this asphalt road since 2013, but still sometimes it's impossible to go there. So time is so slow there, you know, like people have long winter nights without a connection with the rest of the world. That's why actually maybe they some sort protected their culture, their Kurdish language, and their memories about Armenians, and chess culture is still protected. It's all about time and how they spend their time during this blockage. And of course, landscape is important part of the film because landscape, especially the mountains, are so important for Armenians, especially. You know, you must know the Ararat is a kind of symbol mountain for all Armenians. Actually, it's very close to my hometown. But in this film, also we are all surrounded by mountains. It was a kind of symbol of hope for Armenians, but also a symbol of protection for Kurds, for guerrilla, also for refugees coming from Afghanistan or Iran. The mountain means the border that they have to pass. And also for Turkish state, the mountain, these huge mountains all around country, especially in Kurdish part of the country, it's some sort of canvas that Turkish state always shows that this is Turkish Republic or this is the mountain of Turkish Republic. You always feel that the pressure of the state, because mountains can be seen from everywhere, you know, and then you remember this, okay, this is occupation, you know, at least for me and for us. Yeah, so of course, as you said, all this landscape that I used as a kind of, as a witness to the memory, you know, and also the water, for example, that you see in different forms in the film, as snow, as ice, or as water going through the rivers. You know, that's, I thought it can be kind of reference or a metaphor for the different forms of remembering, different forms of memory. Ice can be seen as kind of blockage of our minds, you know, blockage that's refusing the genocide or not seeing genocide, or cleaning the snow is a reference of ethnic cleansing or something like this. Yeah.
Great. Given that we only have 10 minutes left, I'm going to open the panel to the audience questions and see if there are some questions. Yes. Yeah.
Can you use the microphone?
This is so annoying.
Much for your, there you go. Thank you so much. It was incredible. I'm Armenian, and it was incredible to see so many Turkish names in the credits, all of whom I think, when asked what they were doing, must have responded by saying, I'm working on a film in part about the Armenian genocide. There's so much bravery in many of the people that took part in this film. And I have kind of a big question for you, because you went there, so it's a hard, I don't know if it's answerable, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So you went there to learn about your father, which is really learning about yourself, you know, and your own idea. Oh,
Problem of hearing.
here, I can say it. How about I talk like this? Is that better? Or like this? Okay, that's better. So you went there to learn about your father, which is in part learning about yourself and your own Turkish identity. And it must have been, I guess my question is, what's your relationship to your Turkish identity? Because you're both critical of Turkey and its erasure. And at the same time, I'm sure you're quite, you know, you identify as a Turkish woman. So, no, you don't. Okay, so tell me more about that then.
Okay. Could we take a few questions and then you can answer, or do you want to answer immediately? Okay, sure.
This is an important question. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm the child of a Turkish mother and Kurdish father. And I grew up in kind of assimilated, half assimilated family. And Yeah, when I grew up, it was 1980s, and it was impossible to talk about Armenians. It was a big taboo, let's say. But also, Kurdish language was forbidden, and everything related with Kurds, it was also forbidden. So when I was making this film, actually, I was aware that, I am coming a society that both Turks and Kurds were responsible. So the film, you see this playing chess and fighting against yourself. Maybe I can talk a bit more about the Zweig, because the film, the book of Zweig, Stefan Zweig, is about a person who imprisoned by Nazis and playing chess after reading books of chess and playing against himself. So I had an idea of this playing against himself, just fighting against yourself also, because chess is all related with war and strategies. So as you see in the film, I'm mentioning that the Hamidiye groups were formed by Abdulhamid. They were mainly Kurdish, but also Turks included, so all Sunni groups. They were fighting against their own citizens, who were Armenians. Armenians were not enemies. They were all their own citizens. And then when we come to 1990s, the Turkish Republic armed Kurdish villagers to kill their own people, to hunt their own people. Not only guerrilla, but also whoever stands against to the state. So again, we were fighting against ourselves. Nowadays, also many Turkish and Kurdish mayors of Turkey are dismissed from their positions, So selected people all removed from their works, mayors. Again, we select people, but state is against us, So of course, the film is coming from all these backgrounds, I also felt like we are guests, the hotel, because Dr. B, the Zweig's main character, was prisoned in the hotel. And I thought this hotel can be a good metaphor for Turkey, also for mosques, because people were stuck in this area, and people of Turkey also stuck. It's kind of open prison right now. You cannot change. The hotel is something that you cannot change the situation, but you are only a guest. So me, myself, also felt like other opponents. We are only a guest, so we should leave. Making the film, of course, I was questioning my Kurdish and Turkish identity, and not looking genocide as something that happened before, but also continuing. I don't know if it was enough. Yeah, it was perfect. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
All right. Okay, I'll ask mine first. Okay, I have to admit this is a beautiful movie, and the sceneries were out of this world. I don't know who your photographer was. The pictures, every scene you had was like a work of art. How many hours did you film before you decided to make this 1.5 hour long film? How many hours of footage did you film? And who was your photographer, your cinematographer? Who took the film? You?
Me and my camera person, Ercan Yılmaz, we were together, the cinematographers of the film. And I really don't know how much shootings we had, but I would say that, I felt like during the shooting, we were there, I was there myself for 2 weeks research in autumn time before It was around November. And then 2 weeks for winter shooting. And also 1 week for the springtime, because I also wanted to record something in spring because it was the time of genocide. So the film was ending with springtime. As a kind of also circle of the repetition of the violence and also the seasons. When we were shooting, I felt like, I was editing in my mind. So we didn't shoot so much, actually, because it was so cold and it was very hard to go to top of the mountains. Always you need permission to go, to come back, and police should attend you because it's dangerous. Yeah, but I also tried to not use so beautiful images because it would also take the attention of people. The beauty is not so important. The silence. I tried to concentrate to the silence of the landscape. Thank you.
Actually, Pinar is generously willing to take a few more questions.
I like to talk
If
because
you
I see
wish
some
to
questions
leave,
coming.
You can leave, but those of you who have questions
Just,
and want to have a conversation, we can continue.
A comment. It's a beautiful film, I have to admit. But you asked, your last question was about space and time. I just want, and I think Pinar gave a beautiful answer to that. However, I want to add that Hayrik Muradian's songs are all about the space, about the mountains and rivers. So
yeah.
it sort of fits well with those songs.
It's all about mountains, and there were some songs that was sung for the bazaar of the mosques, for example, and sheep and animals and everything. Yeah, you are right. Thank you.
Yes. A few more questions? Yes. Yes, there is one here. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Hi, thank you so much for being here today. That was a beautiful film, and per your explanation of how the film is a remembrance of Armenian culture per the genocide and how we're currently experiencing and witnessing a genocide, I guess my question is, how do we continue to resist that violence and that cycle of violence, especially through film and media? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, when I was making this film, it was before Gaza, it was before 7 October. So, yeah, I was thinking, what would I do if I made this film after Gaza, Because there is only reference to the Holocaust, Because I didn't know, actually. Also, before documenta, I didn't know that Germany has so much, some sort of sensibilities of not talking about genocide, During documenta, we witnessed this. So nobody wanted to respond to this film also, because it was also about genocide. Nobody mentioned the film. Nobody mentioned Holocaust also, or they were also afraid if the film comes to the discussion comes to genocide of today, to Gaza. So of course I would include something that Germany actually was not responsible for only Holocaust, but also Gaza. Yeah. Also Armenian genocide, because the Germany was our ally, the ally of Turkish Republic, and they had so much power, and Ottomans were so weak that time. So Germany would stop Armenian genocide if they wanted. But what happened, Hitler, when he was entering Poland, he said, who remembered Armenians now? Just go, just to start, just to continue.
Maybe one or two more questions. If not, oh, yes.
Thank you. Congratulations, it's a beautiful movie. I would like to know more about the Black
Rooster? The rooster. She's asking about the black rooster. Yeah.
Black Rooster, yeah, it was the story that actually that I learned when I was in MOX. And yeah, I immediately wanted to add to the film, but to the end of the film, because I was aware of something is coming, you know. But as I said, not genocide in Gaza, but I felt like this racism or the fascism is coming. You know, I was always calling that fascism is coming, you know, fascism is coming. As a person, artist coming from Turkey, and we know all about this military coups. You know, we have like 60s, 70s, 80s military coups. Every 10 years, you know, the stop of democracy and starting again and again. So we knew about it. Whenever I told my friends, especially Germans, that this is fascism, the fascism is coming, they said, no, it's not fascism. So, but I wanted to use it, you know, at the end, that maybe people will think about that another disaster is coming.
Okay, I think that is perfect.